Yeah, and the second rule is be on time, which is one that no one ever follows, literally ever.
Someone says
Sound.
Does that mean?
What is that? Is it too high? Too low? None at all? Let us know.
Feedback is a critical.
Sound is good. Sound good.
Sound good.
Sound good, everyone. Love it. Well, hello, heroes. I am James D'Amato, president of the One Shot Network, host of the One Shot and Campaign podcasts, and also author of the Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide and the upcoming Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide. And that's kind of why we're here today, because we're going to be talking about role-playing technique. But it's not just going to be my perspective, because I'm here with Darcy Ross.
And I have a book in my actual human hands that I have been waiting for a long time. So this is your best game ever. I am, of course, coming from Monty Cook Games, and you might have seen me GMing Invisible Sun for the A Woman with Hollow Eyes show on the network before. But today I get to talk about role-playing technique, which is something I care a lot about. And it's something that your best game ever has a lot to offer both players and GMs, both new and experienced folks. So I'm excited to talk about it. And, you know, I think, like, I'm really excited to do this with you, James, because I think both of these...
Darcy's mic is a little low.
I'll project for a minute, but...
Yeah. You work on projecting while I try and figure things out.
Like, part of the reason I love this... It's like less than 2 weeks till I go to Gen Con, folks. This is what we're dealing with. Thank you. I bet this is audio now. People, yep. Classic mistake. Thank you, folks. Sorry, James. Hello, everybody. You can hear me now, theoretically.
You can spend a ludicrous amount of money setting up a great studio. Yeah, sorry about that. That must have been a sonic mistake. But you do have to plug things in, it turns out.
Yeah, you cannot automate the human element, turns out.
Now I'm a little quiet? Oh no. Okay, we'll go through this once more. Okay, I'm okay compared to her. Much louder. Okay. I will, because I did fiddle with her stuff when it wasn't working at all. I'll be right back once more.
Cool. Something you can help us with, chat, is letting us know what kind of topics you're interested in talking about today. We've definitely got some stuff we want to talk about, and we'll be checking. Some people have posted notes on Twitter about things they'd like to hear about, but you're here with us now, helping us sound check, and we appreciate you. So thank you so much. Yep. It's positioning my mic? I don't think so. It says, howdy, Phil. We're going to take a minute here. Good call. Somebody saw an interview with James. I would love to know where that interview came from. All right. Cool, let's try this.
Okay, hopefully this is better. You might have seen the interview on, is it Dragon Talk, or is it just whatever D&D's official show is that I should know. Greg, if you're out there, I'm sorry for not remembering the name of your show. Right, yeah, it is Dragon Talk. Cool, I did remember it right. That was a very, very fun show to do, and I was so happy to be able to talk about this book. I can't wait, hopefully, to go on and talk about the next one, because it's a little different. But we just did our introductions. Boy, what a messy stream. Can't wait to see what this looks like post-edit on YouTube. There's going to be a whole section that we just cut right the hell out of this one. Good for us.
This is exclusive content for you, dear listeners.
So actually, one thing that I wanted to dive into, because I saw the Kickstarter, but I don't actually know much about your best game ever.
I would love to tell you about it. So it arose from the idea that, there is RPG advice out there and has been for a long time, right? But I think it's tread a lot of specific territory, and there's some aspects of what it takes for like a new person just learning about RPGs to sort of get going, right? There's sort of a lot of stuff you have to learn about and grok and try to do for the first time that doesn't really get talked about. So this is things like, how do I find or create a good group? How do I host? What should I consider when I host a game, right? A lot of these logistics that go beyond, there's stuff in here about creating a character and backstory and GM advice and world building, but there's also stuff like kind of the social engineering side of it that can be really tricky and can really turn a good experience great or a lot less great, right? So there's some sections in here that I saw people asking about on Twitter about like, how do I handle a player who's like maybe not a good fit for the group, or how do I talk about this kind of subject? A lot of the advice of like, something in my game is awry is like talk to the players around you, which is great advice. But what I like about this book, and I think one of its unique rare features, is that it provides like real actionable, almost like dialogue about how to get that awkward, socially hard conversation started. So this is really a book that we're hoping will be a really good resource for people who are like seeing streamed games and want to start it for the first time, but really want to like want to make their games awesome right from the start and just want a handle on things, as well as people who have been like gaming forever like me, but there's so many aspects to get better at that they can go dive into some sections that have some advice or suggestions or questions you should ask yourself to improve. So that's sort of the pitch.
Our RPGs are like, because they're a very dynamic thing, they're one of those things where you can spend forever mastering them because there is so much that goes into a particular game. And you're absolutely right in that a lot of the advice that I see online, especially surrounding social dynamics, is advice for what to do when there is a problem. But there's not a lot of like preventative advice that like heads those problems off at the pass.
Totally.
Which I think is a really cool thing about this book. And it's so funny like how technically the Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide is like related. I would call this like a cousin of that book, but so very different. I like that this is sort of like kind of focusing on the total experience. Because, there's no bit of anything that I've done in my RPG history that has turned me into somebody who's good at scheduling things. But that is a part of what we're doing.
It is. All the time.
It would be great if there was like an adult who would sort of lay down for me, this is what you do in order to accomplish that.
I would love to know, could you tell me more about how the gameplay guide, what its format is like?
So the Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide is a book divided into 3 sections. Section 1 is sort of breaking down the basics in terms of theory and narratology. Kind of looking not just at what are we doing at an RPG table, but sort of trying to break that down into terms and ideas that you might be familiar with from other media. So like literary analysis, film criticism, and whatnot, applying ideas from those fields to role-playing games to give you a better understanding of exactly what's happening at the table.
Oh, that's so cool. I've always wanted to go into like screenwriting. There's a lot of engineering and know-how and expertise there that I feel would be great to pull over to games, but I don't quite know how to make that jump very well.
Well, and
so that's sort of
kind of what I'm trying to bridge in it. The thing about RPGs that's like really unique and fascinating is because it is a living project that you are collaborating with other people to make. Not only is it important like what you create, like let's say you're a really talented role player, you're invested emotionally, you're excited to create things. Every time you speak, a little bit of poetry comes out of your mouth, like you're just in the zone. But it's also based on interpretation of other people's ideas. So you need to be listening with an active ear and like figuring out how to communicate and talk with people in a common language. So your ideas are really only making up 1/5 of what happens at a table if you've got a group of 4 players and a GM. So you want to make sure that you're listening to them and taking in their ideas, incorporating all of that. So there's an aspect of both analysis and active creation in it. So that's what section 1 is trying to do, is trying to like break that down, like all of that weird heady stuff down into like terms that you might be familiar with, where you can go, okay, even if I'm not tracking every aspect of this at every game, I understand the structure of it. So when I'm looking at, well, how do I want to improve myself, improve my skill, improve my experience, it should help you have words for that, track down those things.
That's so important.
So you can focus on them.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that's section 1.
That's section 1.
And is that for GMs and players?
It's GMs and players.
Got
We took sort of like a total approach to it. And actually in my book, I call them GMs and PCs because we assume that everyone at the table is a player.
That's a huge thing we focus on here too, right? And I think breaking down the roles and the authority and like the agency about getting to touch the narrative and getting to be an active participant in that really cool creative process. Like I feel like there's a lot of baggage that I'm excited to that's getting unpacked about like who does what and who gets what kind of authority. And it sounds like your book is really doing that too, right? It's empowering players to say, oh, I can really take a lot of this like, I don't know, expertise and like I can train in this just as much as a GM can, right?
And that's absolutely true. Like there's so much skill that goes into role playing generally, whether you're in like a PC role or a GM role, or you're playing a GM-less game.
Yeah, totally.
Like, there's so much that goes into it. So I figure like there's a lot of GM advice out there, but it's not like playing is a cakewalk.
Right.
Well, or not to imply that it's not easy or it's hard or like that would somehow make it not fun. It's just there's a lot you can do to be,
I'll try to keep my head facing the same way.
Yeah,
that might be it.
I think probably audio problems are going to be related to the mic positioning. So anyway, as I was saying, like there's a lot that goes into it. There are a lot of different aspects of role playing that you can be good at or better at, and so that's what we're trying to do in breaking down these things. And I think Your Best Game Ever is actually a very good companion book to Ultimate Gameplay Guide, because there are some things like in terms of who has authority to do what and what roles are which that I sort of briefly explain in like bullet points that it feels like this book goes into in a lot greater detail.
I think it tries to, yeah. But like hopefully gentle, accessible detail, I feel like is the approach of this book. So what's the third part then?
Part 2. We didn't even get into part 2. So part 2 is taking those structures that we established in part 1, taking what we broke down, and then applying techniques from other fields to that. So teaching you how to create literary metaphors improvisationally. So teaching you how to use things like imagery and stuff like that. Really giving you tools that we've used in film and comics and literature and all throughout these different places and giving you not just advice and like, well, maybe try incorporating imagery in your game, but actually providing you with game mechanics that you can incorporate into your game that will help you draw on these different techniques without having to work very hard to do it. So I call that like the advanced skills section. Once you've got past section 1 and you sort of understand all the different moving parts, you get into like this area where like, okay, now that we know how that works, we can do all sorts of wild stuff with it. So that is like a pretty heady deep dive, and like there are a lot of things that I want to establish first. But I'm very excited for people to walk away with stuff from the book, because like if you are a fan of Campaign Skyjacks, or you're a fan of One Shot, you like the different things that I'm doing on there, and you wonder like how I approach thinking about those things and how I go about creating those various worlds and characters and whatnot, that is kind of laying out my storytelling-wise technique for how I actually do things. And that's incorporating my background as an improviser and an actor, and all these other things, like doing actual play professionally for years and years. That's incorporating all of that. So there's a lot of neat stuff that's in that section. And then finally, section 3 is exercises to sort of help you work on the techniques. Some of those exercises you can do alone. You don't even need a table full of people to work on them. Some of them are like mini games that you can incorporate into what you do with players at the table. You can even layer them on top of your game, sort of like some of the exercises here in the character backstory guide. So you can just be playing your game and take advantage of these different narrative tools. So I tried to give people, like the information that they needed to understand in order to do cool stuff, advice on how to do the cool stuff, and then tools to work with all of that. So there's plenty in there for that, but that's the basic structure of the book. It is a lot different from the backstory guide, which was kind of a workbook full of different activities. There's a lot more instructional stuff in this one, and it covers a lot more genres than simply fantasy. So we go to a bunch of different places.
Cool. One thing I'm really fascinated by is that is not in here, but is in a recent product that just came out called, I'm going to get the name wrong because I just got it today. Darn it. But it's a set of cards that help you negotiate different safety tools that you have in play.
Okay.
It's by Karen Twelves, and it incorporates a bunch of safety tools that you might know, like the OK Check-in from LARPs, or the X card. And I'm really fascinated by like how we negotiate the narrative at the table in ways that are not stopping the narrative and having a whole conversation about it and then returning. So I'm curious, does your book include, or like, would these exercises kind of help a group learn to do that more naturally?
So I did want to cover safety tools in the book, but the publisher felt that it didn't quite fit in that. So I think there will be room for that down the road. There is not a lot of metatextual discussion. I think I will probably include some metatextual discussion in other books.
Okay.
That feels like your best game ever territory more than it feels like my book's territory right now.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, part of what I'm so excited by is like, I still feel like there's a lot of unbroken ground, right? Like I've never really seen anything like the RPG character backstory guide. I'm so glad it exists. And I've never seen anything like what you're putting out for the ultimate, gameplay.
Gameplay guide.
Gameplay guide. I'm going to get my words right today.
Well, I didn't make up the titles, so there's only so much offense that I could possibly take.
So let's say I'm like a new person to RPGs, or like if I'm a new person to RPGs, should I like go and get my RPG system of choice, sort of read it, get a group together, and then like immediately dive into the ultimate gameplay guide, or like does it expect you to have played a little bit longer?
So it does not anticipate familiarity. Like we really try to slowly establish things. Like the market that we imagined for it, I think, is very similar to the market that we imagined for your best game ever, in that it is for people who have played games before and know it, but it's also for that crowd of people who maybe has just been listening to actual play and is really curious about it. And like I know, like a younger version of me felt they really needed to study up on it before they started doing it because there were so many moving parts. So like if you're somebody who's like, you know, I love what's happening on Critical Role, I love what's happening on the Adventure Zone, I want to be a part of that, or I want my game to run more like that. That's what I see the backstory guide for, is like sort of giving you the words to explain what is happening in those shows and then giving you the tools to like make that happen at your table.
Awesome. One other thing I wanted to call out before I missed crediting them is we had a number of consulting experts work on Your Best Game Ever. And so Monty wrote the text, a number of us contributed sort of our own essays about some segment of RPG advice that we were really passionate about and had some specific advice for. So the MCG team did, as well as a bunch of like streamers and cool people that you might know, like Tanya DePass, a bunch of folks from all over the industry sort of contributed essays and also had a chance to like look through the text and sort of leave their fingerprints on it. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is like a collaborative project full of people who are awesome, and I appreciate them deeply. So, getting that credit.
And I will say for both the character backstory guide and the gameplay guide, like there's a lot of inspiration that I took from different designers. Like I know people like Emily Care Boss, Alex Roberts, Robin D. Laws. Like I looked to their games and their game books and how they designed some of that to incorporate them in. Like the Baker family, for instance, doing Apocalypse World, like there are so many mechanics that ended up in the RPG backstory guide and the gameplay guide that sort of influence, like they were influenced by that Powered by the Apocalypse structure. So there's a lot of stuff in there that is, you know, greatly influenced by them, even if they weren't, you know, straight up co-authors on it.
Awesome. I've already seen a couple good questions in chat. We had stuff that we could talk about. Where do you want to go from here?
Well, let's see. We will get to questions in a second, but I sort of wanted to sample people on what might be in these tomes, and I would love to talk about world building a little bit with you.
I'm gonna flip to it because I can do that now. So heads up that I have not read this thing. I just got it in my grubby little paws, so I'm very excited.
Got it shortly before Gen Con.
Yeah. But I've also been doing some really fun Your Best Game Ever videos with Monty, and I just recorded one with Monty and Shauna, sort of diving into some of this material. So I'm familiar, but I have not read the whole thing, so pardon me. But I guess Your Best Game Ever, how it sort of approaches world building or asks that somebody who's thinking about world building, some of the first things they should think about is sort of, you know, where on the spectrum of your own creation versus borrowing versus stealing wholesale, happily stealing, right, of a world do you want to play in, right? Do you want to create something totally new? Do you want to create something with the serial bars filed off? Or do you want to just play in a universe that you and your friends already know? And all of those are totally valid. They just have different considerations, right? So, you know, the world building sort of starts from there and then goes into a lot of advice about some different aspects of world building that you might want to consider. Things about like culture and like, you know, sketching out possibly a map, depending on if that's, you know, part of your needs, and also things like advice about sort of the minimum viable world that you need to build to start playing in. I don't think it uses that term, but you know, that idea to start small. And so a lot of times, just like we're sort of trying to pick apart the roles and the activities of what is often assigned to the GM versus the player, right, or versus the PC. World building is often something that a GM has in their hands, but not always. And you as a player, right, should have some bit of the world that you can contribute, and you do, whether you knowingly do so or not, right? By building your character, you're establishing that character exists in the world. And so that's a cool window through which we get to look at world building. And so I think the world building chapter talks a lot about how to, you know, as a game group, sort of figure out if you would like to do more serious business collaborative world building, which I'm a big fan of, sort of how to do that and how to riff off of each other and you know, empower each other and sort of, you know, it's kind of vulnerable if you've never done it before to give those to be asked to to create in such a major way. And so there's a little bit of advice on how to sort of get practice starting that and to encourage each other so that they feel comfortable bringing up cool ideas they have about world building at your table. So that's sort of where it starts.
Yeah. In the Ultimate Gameplay Guide, we sort of lay out what session 0, like kind of that's a full chapter of it.
Nice.
And part of that is like structuring the conversation around, okay, what do we want out of this game?
Yes.
And how do we create a world that gives us opportunities to do what we want? Because like if you're, if you want to do a sort of romantic slice of life game, perhaps playing in the world of Warhammer 40K is not going to be exactly conducive to what you want. If you're looking for a parody of that slice of life game, then maybe the world of Warhammer 40K will help you do that. But it's sort of like laying down like, okay, how do things like genre and tone help us have the experience at the table that we want? A huge part of the conversation that I put into session 0 is about establishing goals. What sort of goals do you have for this campaign? Or are you going to be telling a story? Are you going to be exploring? What sort of goals do you have for your world? Do you want to have a huge impact on the world? Do you want the world to have more of an impact on you? What kind of goals do you have at an individual character level?
Yeah.
And this is something that like the Invisible Sun game does very well, where you sort of set up plot arcs for your characters, so everybody kind of has that knowledge of like, oh, okay, this person is trying to, steal from the Prince of Thieves, so that we know we're going to be leaning heavily into like learning about thieves and stuff throughout this game. Goal also goes hand in hand with something I call tone, which is, how violent is this game going to be?
Yeah.
If we're stealing from the Prince of Thieves, is this going to be a thing where we're going to get bloody Game of Thrones style reprisals where heads of our allies are mailed to us or something like that? Or is this going to be like cartoony? Are we going to see like scenes from Aladdin of, this charismatic, handsome thief dancing across the blades of guards' swords without much care for real physical danger? All of that is baked into what goals you have as both a player, as a character, as a GM, as a steward of the world that you're building.
Oh, I love that so much. And that lends itself, I know some folks have been talking about safety mechanics. Lines and veils are sort of, thought about as a safety mechanic, but I think they're also just, it's part of that session 0, what are we here to do conversation, and kind of the ongoing check-ins about, is the tone turning out to be what we expected it, right? So I think I've also enjoyed thinking about world building as something that doesn't just get set up in session 0, right? I think as you explore, as your characters follow their character arcs, as the GM takes you to new locations, you might go the world that you're playing in, right? Your campaign, you might be in like a charming, sort of pastoral, lovely settlement at the beginning of it, and you're telling the story about sort of romance and cute things, and then you move, your players physically move, or something happens to the area, and suddenly you can be playing in a different tone than you started in, and that can be great. But it's also something to be talked about. So I'm excited that machinery of how to discuss that together is baked into your fundamentals.
Yeah, and I think like it is a critical thing to think about. Like when you put something in a world, it kind of affects what you're able to interact with. If you place a group of role-playing characters in a dark room and there is a knife in the middle of the room, it sort of leads people to the ideas of what they might be able to do in this room. If you're like, oh, I just wanted you to use the knife to pry the door open, I don't know if that's the first assumption that people are going to make based on the world that you've created. And sort of the thing that I think session 0 should do and your world building discussion should do is metatextually establish exactly what you're going to be doing, because it makes a huge difference how a knife is presented or whether or not a knife is present based on, when building the kinds of ideas that people have forming in their little brains for role-playing.
Oh man, that makes me think of a particular thing that I struggled with when I was first trying to become a GM and trying to get the idea of world building and narrating and sort of adjudicating a whole world for people under my feet. And I was really worried about kind of portraying things so that they felt like real, or portraying NPCs that felt like totally unique and like no one had ever done before, and no one had, something tabula rasa, right, emerged from some platonic little fertile ground in my head and had never been touched by the outside influences of media, which I do not recommend anyone to go down that horrible, horrible rabbit hole. So one of the things that I think applies to creating either a world or an NPC or a PC is that like influences are good, and you can work with them, and they're great starting points, and you can really achieve a remarkable feeling of novelty and feeling of real and depth and like kind of verisimilitude and uniqueness. You can get to that point even if you start at, what if it was Aladdin meets Warhammer 40K, right? Like, you can start there, and I think this book, and I'm positive the tools presented in these other books, can help you play with that and tinker it and take that Rubik's Cube and peel a bunch of stickers off and stick new ones on and shuffle it around until your players will never know, okay? They'll never know. So like, let me be the permission to to free you of feeling the need to sort of emerge with these perfectly unique ideas right from the get-go. So that's my soapbox.
One of the things that I sort of establish in the first part of the book is when you are setting out to do different things, like when you're making your decisions about how your RPG experience should be formed, one of the things that you're asking yourself is, where do I want to work? You can do a lot of work like crafting, hex by hex your setting and know, the Knowles Castle is in hex G37, and the King's Vacation Palace is in hex E42 or something like that. Those hexes, that made no sense, but you can do that. You can lay out what your entire setting is if that's something that you're really interested in. But if that is not a fun and rewarding thing to you, you can absolutely go, no, I just want Castle Greyhawk. It's something someone already wrote everything about it. They did all the work for you already. I don't know how to do a map or blueprints or anything. Someone's already done that work. The thing that I'm interested in is characters and character relationships. So I'll just take Castle Greyhawk, I'll throw out all the established NPCs and populate it myself. Or I don't give a shit about character relationships at all, or making maps and stuff. I'm just using Castle Greyhawk to be Castle Greyhawk, and what I want to do for my games is react to my players. So that, like in world building, when you're deciding, am I working with a pre-established universe? Am I riffing on a pre-established universe or creating something whole cloth? That is, what work appeals to you? And where are you going to find your fun in that work?
And what I love about that, right, is you can have those 3 different hypothetical GMs, or however many we ended up listing, and like no one is better than the other for those reasons, right? Like they're just really different ways to be great players and of either GM or PC roles. And like they're all valid and different, and you might become different. I love getting to try out different kinds of players or different kinds of GM I like trying out what happens if I do try to create a world from scratch. How do I like it? Do I hate it? It's fun to find out, right? Yes, I like that. That's awesome. One question I had for you that comes up in the world building section here that I think is it's a piece of advice from Monty that's knocked around in my head for a long time now, and I just can't get it out, so I want to share it. And it's about verisimilitude versus realism. And so it's about, when you're creating a world or depicting a world, if you're, I just saw, what did I just see? I saw Terminator for the first time the other day.
Oh, yes.
And I was like, as soon as they open it up on like gritty, like 80s LA, it's just so, like, it brings you right there, right? Like, and I was like, I don't know if this is accurate at all, and I kind of hope it isn't, but it feels it has a lot of verisimilitude. There are all these details to that setting that make it feel lived in and real. And so a sort of example that I want to present to you is sort of, I played in this great Delta Green campaign once, and it was a GM that operates on an entirely different type of like plane than I do, because he's very like, established this whole tight campaign where every little thing was like known, all these agents he had thought about forever, and all these plots, right? It's this perfect clockwork system that we were interacting with in a really fun and engaging way. Like that can go many unfun ways, and he just rocked it. It was amazing. But playing in that campaign, like, how much C4 would it take to blow up the building, and could we physically bring that in? Was like a question we had to like stop the game and like go Google for like a half hour, like, what would it take to blow up this building? How much C4 could potentially do it? How much does that weigh, and could we have smuggled it in? And it was great fun, but like I think that level of detail is like really getting into the realism. That you can sort of choose to go down that pretty hard, but I think like often you can get by and maybe get a lot more like bang per buck for verisimilitude. And I'm really interested in hearing what you, as sort of like a person who's thought about the literary side of this thing, right? Like to evoke rather to describe, right? Do any of your books sort of deal with like either word choice or how we evoke a feeling of something so that it feels real without having to like lay out how much C4 it takes?
Oh, Darcy.
Please tell me things, because I need this.
So happy that you decided to talk about that, because specific language and all that is sort of the key that the gameplay guide is built on. And that's sort of what I was trying to express to you earlier over direct messages. So I have laid out a lot of different theories and created my own kind of internal lexicon for the Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide, mainly because some of the work has not been done before, or there's parts of the work on this RPG analysis that's been done by other people, but they're using their own stuff, and I don't want to steal their stuff. So I am speaking kind of a different language from some of my friends, even if I am 1,000% confident that we're all sort of invested in talking about the same thing. Darcy is one of the smartest people that I know. So I was a little concerned when my explanation didn't seem to get through earlier. So what we're going to do is see if we can have this conversation live on air.
I'm so excited.
And go through. So because interpretation is a huge part of what's happening at the table, the specific words that people use, the specific messages that you put out to the group are going to dramatically affect the sort of tool, like the toy box that everybody is playing with, because it's what you're putting out there. And all of that.
Do you mean like the dialogue that I as a player say, like
that,
the literal words that are, okay.
The words that you as a human being.
I'm a wizard, and I go into my wizard's library, right? So like that would be a part of dialogue.
Exactly. So. And that's dialogue that you have now put into what I call the text of the game.
Ooh, cool.
So when we talk about things like literary analysis, text-based literary analysis is based on the words that appear on the page. Now, when you're analyzing an author's work, there's a lot of different stuff and like angles that you can go with it. Some literary analysts will look at the specific period of history that like Shakespeare was in when he wrote a particular word, and then base their analysis based on what they know of that period. If you're doing textual analysis, you're going, well, all the information that I have is these words on the page. So I don't care that Shakespeare had a relationship with the queen or whatever and knew people like that. That's not immaterial to the work that's in front of me right now. And when we play an RPG, we pretty much have the text. Now, you might know your friends and whatnot and go, I know that my good friend Grant likes sexy half-orcs, so I'm going to make sure that I describe this half-orc as sexy. But you like that is sort of an immaterial thing to the text of the game, where you say a half-orc enters the room. Grant, being a player who loves half-orcs, might look at that half-orc and go, that's a sexy half-orc. But
that's not in the text yet, potentially.
That's exactly. That's like in a weird meta space that exists maybe in some players' minds, but other players' minds maybe not. Catherine across the table might think of half-orcs as like, oh, well, aren't they like sort of brutish and spooky? So maybe this is a very gaunt creature in Catherine's mind. So half-orc enters the room. You've said two different things to two different players with the same text. Cool. So text is like anything that is said and how it is said forms the experience that other players have. And that creates the explicit reality of the game. The explicit reality is anything that has entered the text and is sort of an indisputable fact of the game world. There is an orc. There is a wizard. There is a wizard's library. Those are things that everybody knows, but we all have our implicit reality of ideas that that literal text has brought into our minds that colors our experience. And the implicit reality shifts and changes based on the explicit reality, but the explicit reality will also shift and change based on the implicit reality. If Grant's character walks up to the half-orc and starts hitting on them, that might radically change either Catherine's idea of what that half-orc looks like or Catherine's idea of what Grant's character looks like. And maybe not even looks, like how they behave. So there's like a lot of different layers to this, and the specific words that we use, that we as players, as authors, put into the text will shape what we're able to create, what ideas our friends are able to create. So a vast part of like improving as a player from the gameplay guide's perspective is intentionally entering ideas into the text, choosing a way to communicate with fewer words that will be able to express larger ideas. You know, like going back to this wizard's library, the things that we choose to describe in the wizard's library and how we choose to describe the library are going to wildly affect the type of room people have in their implicit reality. Like, what would you think when you picture your wizard's library?
Throw rugs.
Throw rugs.
It's a cozy wizard's library.
So a cozy wizard's library. Cozy is an incredibly important word here, because cozy.
Doing a lot of work.
Cozy, like, to me, feels a little rustic and a little like homey and all of that, like pleasant and good. I picture there being a fireplace there.
Definitely.
I picture it being warm. But like something like throw rugs and like being warm and rustic could also mean that it's dusty and dirty. But if I say you enter a dusty wizard's library, well, that's probably going to affect, like cozy might not even enter that equation anymore. A dusty wizard's library, well, that's like this huge austere beast that has too many books for anyone to ever touch, let alone read. And so there's dust everywhere. It's like Ken's library. So it sort of impacts your ability to interact with that fiction on an even playing field. Using the word cozy, like, changes the implicit reality surrounding that text a great deal, and it brings everybody into Darcy's level. Darcy, being a very talented role player, was able to arrive at the word cozy very quickly, and create, like, I feel like our wizard's library, if we were to pull the images out of our minds, I feel like they might not look that different right now because we're anchored on that cozy word.
Oh, that's so interesting. I found that when I first started GMing, I think I found this hardest when I first started GMing, and I found it super interesting and totally surmountable. So fear not. But but it would be it was actually when I started co-GMing. I was running it my first campaign ever. I was co-GMing with Liz Sander, and we were running Numenera, and it was our first time, you know, GMing a long form thing. And especially as co-GMs, we'd have set up, you know, the session a little bit beforehand, sketch some ideas together, and I'd be describing one room, and Liz would be describing something a little different, and we would sort of look at each other and go, "Oh no, we have different ideas about like whether there's a wall there," and that starts to be really confusing to the players, right? So there's some like that's getting into the very like the architecture of the place, but also like the tone, right? Your fellow players will react differently to the room depending on the words you use to describe it, right? And I love getting to see how this plays out during one-shots, running the same one-shot over and over again, and seeing how slight changes in the text create vastly big differences in sort of the implicit reactions that I'm getting from the players around me. I'm probably using your words wrong because I haven't read the book yet, but I will. But what I mean is, like, I've had there's a Numenera one-shot where there's a cool, creepy old lady, and she's got like a bunch of weird like machines hooked up to her, and she's like way weird and biomechanical, and she's just supposed to be weird. But if there were a couple words that I totally forget now, but if I would use a specific word, all the players would immediately assume she was evil and would not give up that ghost. And I could never turn them back around, making it a more ambiguous character. So I learned the value of like very specific use cases of text.
Well, like the line between mystery and horror is extremely thin.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of, like in mysteries and horror games, there are going to be shadowy areas, right? But depending on how you describe the lack of light, you can prepare a player, you can telegraph to a player, something bad is going to happen here, or you need to take a closer look at things.
Yeah.
And those are extremely different messages.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
How many times have you been GMing a game where players have to open a door and it takes a literal fucking hour?
Session, yeah.
It's a whole session! Do we open this door or not?
Oh my
Please,
God.
please, please open the door. And a lot of that, I think, is anchored back at language and how that language is used and whether or not you're intentionally communicating the ideas that you want to communicate to your group. Because, it's all based on their interpretation. If the door is supposed to be scary and dangerous, asking a player a question like, so you touch the handle, that is like so loaded and that communicates so many things that you might not like. You might have been like, yes, earlier there's this delightfully chubby goblin who's been stuffing his face full of jam donuts, and when you touch the handle you get a little bit of jam on your fingers, but do you touch the handle? The player's like, oh my god, my soul is going to get sucked out into this doorknob forever.
Oh my gosh.
So it's real important what you say and how you say it.
But also I love when mistakes, when unexpected delights happen, right? I think I almost without fail these days, like when something like that happens where, the person I'm speaking to has a totally different reaction than what I expected them to what I've said. I usually just go with it because now I'm surprised and now I don't know where things are going. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that is. How do I, if I'm playing a PC, if I've done something like that I didn't expect for my character to do, I really love sort of backtracking into my backstory and figuring out, okay, now that I've done that and that is now a part of the text of this character, what had to happen in their backstory to get me there? What underlying componentry of their personality or what they're reacting to here is what caused them to do that? And I think that's how I build a lot of my PCs. For some reason, I really struggle to build them whole cloth at the beginning. There's quite a bit in here about helping you get there and some cool tricks about how to sort of get a feel for a character early on. Lots more tricks available in the RPG character backstory guide that I can't recommend enough. But for all the tricks that I have tried, I always find myself really enjoying the process of that backfilling. Okay, now that I've done a thing, and that's true about this character, what had to happen beforehand? And I think it's because I hate myself, because that's really hard to do. So I don't necessarily recommend it, but that's a lot of my fun of where backstory happens is often several sessions in.
Yeah, you can see that unfold live before your eyes in A Woman with Hollow Eyes.
That's very true.
Because Calvin went into that like as an extreme blank slate, but it was like 2 or 3 very small things that happened during the course of play that like wildly changed where the character ultimately ended up.
That's a great point.
So, and like that is part of world building as well, what you're doing in play too.
Totally. And like, I have this semi-facetious thought that I have often, which is like, is world building that doesn't get said at the table really there, right? Like,
it's the implicit reality, Darcy. We've stepped into it.
We have a word now. Oh my God. It's very exciting. But I like to think about, your PCs and, the characters at your table, especially the PCs. I like to think about them as these windows to the world, right? Like, everything I want, I can world build on my own just fine, but at the table, my time with these people is so precious that like, I want the world building elements that unfurl. I want the way the world is changing and happening to really matter for all these PCs, because that's where the fun is for me, that reacting and that interplaying off these other players and especially their characters. So I think like, I love what robust world building session zeros do for me, like Invisible Sun, where it literally pops your characters down, and it builds a little like fog of war, clears a little fog of war in this world around these people, right? And that just gives you lots of stuff to hang on to and pull on, so that any world building I'm doing, it's always at the service of this cool story we're getting through the window of these characters, I think.
Yeah, I think that there is really good methodology in the way it works in Invisible Sun for allowing you to have some active things. Because like Invisible Sun is one of those things that comes with a pre-established setting. Like there are pre-established secrets in that game about like the larger bits of the world that are going on, but you don't and specifically shouldn't know that as you start playing. And what Invisible Sun does for you is it plops you down and has you build your own little Lego fort around these characters with stuff that you can play with, which allows you to wander out of that or have interjected into it parts of this larger setting stuff. So players just need toys that are immediately in front of them that they know how to play with, so that you can start incorporating more stuff. And like trying to get everything at once sometimes is like too wild and too crazy. I mean, let's just look at campaign Star Wars. We had the entire Star Wars universe to draw on for that game.
And you're at Bike.
Yeah, and we went to Bike, which is not a thing. Kat started us on Merkur, and like there was all this stuff going on with George Cardos and the Ysalamiri that were there. But the things that we knew how to do as idiots were to like steal from these people and try to escape with our butts intact. So that's what we chose to do. Kat rolled with that, and she followed that improv, and that's what that game became about. I think good solid world building doesn't need to be everything is like laid out in front of those players. Like if you look at Skyjacks, for example, we created a brand new setting, and I did a session 0 with them that has not been released because there's still spoilers in that session 0. Cool. But like I took that session 0 and I went off and I built the world of Skyjacks, and I decided on some top level mechanics. And there are some things that Johnny, Liz, JPC, and Tyler don't know about in that setting because it hasn't come up for them and it hasn't been relevant to them. I have that answer. If they ever ask the question or get steered into an area where the question becomes relevant, I'll be able to supply that answer. But the only thing that matters is like, what's their ship like? What sort of cartoon characters have they populated that world with? And it's all active, like give and take part of the game.
I love it. So we've talked a little bit about world building. I'm really excited you got into the sort of unpacking the lexicon that will probably help me think about RPGs in a better sense. So I'm very excited for that book, and we should all read it together. Is there anything else you wanted to say about world building, or should we move on to a different topic?
I think we should move on to a different topic, and maybe, I've actually got a clock right in front of me. I think maybe we could take a couple listener questions.
Yeah, I think we should.
I will pull up on my phone my Twitter. I made a tweet. You can navigate your way to that tweet and ask questions there. I think that is going to be probably the best place for it because the chat is very mercurial. And
I'm trying to remember ones, but I'm just not going to do
a
great job.
It's constantly scrolling. It's constantly scrolling. There will be areas where we will prompt the chat for questions. So if you asked one that we didn't get to during our lecture portion, we will ask again for them. Phonetically mercurial, I think is a very good way to put that.
While James is looking that up, hopefully my sound levels are not coming in too jumpy. I think I just need to look straight on at the camera at you lovely folks. But Invisible Sun is a game we've brought up a bit, and it and several other MCG games are up for some Emmy Awards, so as well as several pretty cool podcasts, such as Asians Represent on the One Shot Network.
Yes.
And what else? What else do we have to show? So Invisible Sun is up for 4 Emmys. We're really excited, and we're doing a cool Gleam raffle right now until Sunday night when the voting ends. So if you would like to win possibly a black cube, go check that out on Monte Cook Games Twitter. and check out all the other awesome stuff that's up for really cool products this year across the Ennies.
One that I will plug, Dream Askew, Dream Apart, I think is up for either Best Rules or Best Game. That is Avery Alder's No Dice, No Masters system. It rules. I really, really like a lot of things about that game. I think it deserves some recognition. Avery also just generally deserves some recognition.
Yeah.
So while you're voting for Asians Represent for Best Podcast, and maybe, I guess, she's a super geek for also, I don't want to tell anybody to rate someone who's not on our network above us, so don't rate them above us, but also please give them recognition because Senda works very hard and I adore them.
Yep.
So definitely go out to the Ennies and vote. With that, I think I am going to real quickly see if there's any way that I can prevent Darcy's audio issues from continuing.
Sorry,
and
folks.
then I'll be right back.
Did I unplug it?
No, you didn't. It's nothing that you did.
Okay.
This is
This time.
equipment stuff.
Cool. So hopefully you're all navigating to the tweet and giving us some cool prompts to talk about. In the meantime, while James is gone, I've got you here. No, I would love to. I'd love to hear folks who are in chat. I recognize some of you, and so I sort of know what your backgrounds are. But if anyone else wants to just chime in about are they newer to games? Are they pretty experienced? Kind of what are they looking for? Might be kind of a fun thing to see from you, chat. Sort of maybe areas you're all working on right now.
Yeah. Sound off on that. Okay, I think Darcy's audio is probably going to be better.
We shall see. I will try to keep my direction going the right way.
I think we had our noise gate turned on for Darcy.
Oh, got it.
Which would make things fade in and out.
Got it.
Okay, so we've got some fun questions. This one I really, really liked. And it is, how do you play a character who's controlling to the point of being really annoying without being controlling and annoying as a player?
Interesting.
This is a real good question.
It says you are almost inaudible.
That's because Haha, here we go. Yeah. So I will ask that question again because it is a good question and I want to make sure everybody can hear it. And that is, how do you play a character who's controlling to the point of being really annoying without actually being controlling and annoying as a player? This is a very good question because it is a tough one. Mm-hmm. And it's one that people grapple with a lot, and I often see people grapple with this question when they're playing a character who is a badass loner. Mm-hmm. Everybody loves Wolverine. Wolverine is super cool. He's a tiny, hairy man. He's got knives on his fingers. It's very cool and very good. And he is constantly making fun of the dumb nerd who gives him orders. And he insists that he works best alone. But for some reason, he's always on a team. And when you bring a lot of that energy to the table, oh shit, this character is, Wolverine is a cool badass, he doesn't work with other people, which is kind of antithetical to what happens at role-playing games. Or, this character is really controlling and annoying, Blue from Evil Campaign, but he's got to be around a group of people, and we all have to like Jim McClure, the player, at the end of the game. Right. So how do we take these characters that really seem like they shouldn't fit in the genre, but still have fun with them because we know we enjoy stories being told about those characters. I am curious, is there anything that your best game ever has to say about this?
It definitely does. I'm trying. There are a couple sections that could apply, so I was trying to find them and not doing a good job.
Then I can explain my thing while you search for them.
Sure.
So what I do is actually there's an exercise in the Ultimate Character Backstory Guide called The Taming of the Wolverine. And the way that exercise works is it takes a badass loner character or a thief who likes to steal everything that's not nailed down, characters that have some antisocial behaviors built into their character concepts, and it gives you caveats. What you're supposed to do in The Taming of the Wolverine is select aspects of your character that are included with your, antisocial tendencies. So if we take a look at Wolverine, the character, Wolverine, badass loner, he doesn't play well on teams. He always clashes with authority figures, but he really likes kids, and he likes to sort of make sure that younger people are safe and protected and are guided in ways that he feels he was not. So Wolverine, even if he's a badass loner, is constantly hanging out with Shadowcat and Jubilee and offering them like dadly life advice. So even though he's this badass loner, he's like always hanging out with teens and like trying to get through to him. And it kind of makes sense that he went on to like take over the Xavier Institute for a short period of time because,
Spoilers.
well, that was spoilers for like 5 years ago in the comics. Jeez. It makes sense because that caveat is built into his character. And that is one of the things that allows him to function on a team when he really shouldn't be part of a team. So what I usually recommend is if you want to play a character who is like a disloyal thief, is sure, they will steal from other people, but they will, for whatever reason, honor their party. Or if they do steal from their party, they're not stealing valuable gold because that is like an in-game currency. And when you steal that, you're stealing from the player and they can't use that on their character. Instead, steal small personal objects like diaries and whatnot, because when you do something like that, it opens new plot possibilities up. When you steal gold from a character or steal other character resources, it closes down possibilities that are available to the player. So if you want to be like a disloyal thief and you steal like the Paladin's diary and you then find the Paladin is a secret prince, that rules because that brings a new concept into the game, and that's something that everyone gets to play with. And this person who has this secret backstory finally gets to show that off. That's amazing. If you steal gold, that person doesn't have gold that they can spend on their character to buy magic items, which sucks a lot. So it's basically, how are you looking at that decision? How are you going to behave towards your party versus how you're going to have this character behave towards the rest of the world?
Absolutely. That's really good advice. The two things that your best game ever tries to think about in sort of what I might call as a broader category of maybe like antagonistic like character choices is sort of, why is the player doing it? What's the motive behind playing that kind of character? I've played with people who play Agents of Chaos because they want to screw you over, right? They just want to fuck up everybody's game and have a good time seeing you squirm, right? That's not a good motive. That's something to talk about, right? But it's like thinking about like, if you're going to play the disloyal thief, like I as a fellow player might want to know that that's the kind of character you're setting yourself up to be, because then I can make a cool choice. Like I feel like I've seen this work best when the sort of antagonistic player has somebody good who's like really here for riffing off of them and letting them show that side of their character, and the other player is really excited to like give that back and forth, right? And I've seen it happen where John Harness, who was in my Numenera game, like that self-same campaign, was playing a character that was Corrail and was really grumpy and hated everyone and mysterious and very angry loner, but it totally worked because there was another creepy, weird angry loner, and they would just like riff off each other. So they got
like two teens smoking at the side of the school.
It was so cute. And it was so fun for everybody at the table, right? And they would just have these bits, and it meant that like that those two players got to show that part of their personality that they were interested in and have this cool in-person like dialogue. But then one of the characters left, one of the players left because they had to move. And John immediately realized that like, oh no, now I'm just playing the loner who doesn't have good character bonds with the other PCs, right? The other characters. So John like made some cool, interesting sort of character arc choices to get that character have more bonds again. Because I think one of the big things about what you're, so there's the motivation and then like what it's doing to the PCs around you, right? When I make that character choice to be an antagonistic, an angry loner, If what that behavior is producing is I'm trying to, I'm having these cool interactions with these players around me because like they're the ones that I'm valuing, or I'm having an antagonistic reaction with this PC over here, but they're really into it. Like if that's sort of the product of that behavior, go for it, right? If as long as everybody's into it and it has a place and has a cool, that cool story moment is not disrupting the fun for everybody else, go for it. But like, so some of the advice that in your best game ever is stuff about like, making your story intentions clear, right? Like communicating on the meta level or just like really, really clearly, in character, sort of I'm role playing this angry loner, but I'm still going to go along with whatever story we've decided to tell, right? Like make that clear. Like I feel like especially when I'm playing with people I don't know, if they're playing an angry loner, I'm like side eye.
How are we going to make this work?
Yeah, and there are ways to make it work, but you got to do it. So make your story intentions clear. And sharing the spotlight, right, I think is a major thing that I love to do. I can't get enough of it. I just always I'm sort of overly obsessive about it. But if what your character's weird choices are doing is getting to show the paladin their secret backstory that they wanted revealed, if that's what your behavior is doing, it's pointed toward another character, it really takes the edge off of the fact that like you're doing a thing that if I was really in that position, I probably wouldn't like, right? And I think that's just like taking the edge off. It's sort of like a GM intrusion, right? Like, I'm going to like complicate your life, which is usually a bad thing, but you get this bonus, right? I'm revealing your backstory. I'm giving you this cool opportunity that you've been looking for to show this personality of your character.
You might even be able to, like if you were playing, like again, this hypothetical thief character, you might be able to turn to another player and go, hey, what do you want me to steal from your character?
Totally.
What is going to be interesting about that for you? And that will open up some of your pathways.
Great point.
I want to focus us on the specific question at hand, because this was about controlling. So before I go into general stuff about that, in the Taming of the Wolverine exercise, because I do have it in front of me, I have different statements about a character, and you are supposed to select at least one caveat for each statement. So if you are sort of a controlling person, the different statements that I have offered up are, I don't respect authority, but I don't get close to people, but I work alone, but I run my mouth, but, and I'm greedy and selfish, but. I think I run my mouth is probably where this character lives. The caveats that I've given are, it's only because I really care. That works because if your character is really controlling because they're micromanaging the people around them, because those people are actually very, very important to them, that gives you a character trait that ties you to someone else. So you being a bossy loner is now completely about your relationship with that other person, and you're trying to keep them safe, or you're trying to make them the best version of themselves in your mind. So that creates a character relationship. So as long if your character is constantly going, look, I know that you've got the greatsword, but I really think you'd work better with this great axe. Like it starts to become like a thing of how you're gonna do it. Like all of a sudden their greatsword is like missing one day, and there's a great axe there, and there's like a little note on it that is from your character. Like that becomes an area to play with. And as long as you're checking in with the player, being like, hey, this is the thing that I want. I think I care about your character, and I think I want this to happen. That will prevent you from being a thing where you're disruptive and being weird to, oh, you're playing a very specific game with my character, and it will occasionally call for you to do things like constantly hand me new great axes to play with.
Oh, I love that. It's that character. That character behavior is falling into the same category as kind of like romance or flirting with another person's character, and I think it's partly because it's stepping over an assumed sort of boundary of like we're all a dungeoneering party, we're like work colleagues, right? So micromanaging is overstepping that boundary, right? Of your agency to control your characters, of your character to control their world. That can be really fun, and same with like flirting and stuff, right? That's a little boundary crossing, super fun, super great for check-ins, and lots of ways to do that. So like, I was thinking about when I finally got to have my like real first like flirty like romance happen in a campaign, which is very exciting. The player and I sort of sat down and were like, hey, I'm like sensing some flirty vibes between our characters. Like, is that something we want to do? How do we feel about that? Where do we see, like, what kind of story are we interested in telling with this? Like, how far, do you want this to be like slow burn, or you like escalate it? And we just had all that conversation, and man, it played out beautifully. It was so great. Still plenty of surprise, but I think you really can't like, have those conversations, and you will probably be surprised how easy it makes like living out that story.
Ooh, we got rated by Mike and Eleni's stream. Very cool. Hello, welcome, and thank you. We're talking about how to play a character who has annoying traits without annoying the rest of the group. And I really like the idea of starting from a place of like, oh yeah, I'm doing these annoying things because my character can't express the feelings that they actually have.
Yeah.
If we look to Evil Campaign and we look to Blue and Zero, and really Blue and Synox, like that was very clear in how Jim operated his stuff. And it was the sort of thing where Zero completely got what was going on, and we don't know if he returned those feelings or not, but like he understood that's like, hey, this is how Blue expresses himself. I like working with Blue. It really benefits me as a character in a bunch of different ways. Mm-hmm. So I'm just cool with that. Synox, the way I dealt with it as a player is Synox doesn't really get interpersonal feelings very well, and all of that kind of went over with his head, and he took everything that Blue did and said at face value, and they clashed. And it's a matter of knowing when to back off on that, which brings me to another one of these traits that I think could really work for a controlling character. I run my mouth, but I need an audience for my nonsense. That puts a limiter on your character. Your character will do things to annoy people, but they know when to back off because they want to keep those people around so that they can keep annoying them.
This is not a call out. I would like to establish.
This is not a call out. This is not a call out.
It's a safe place to discuss this.
It is a personality trait, and some people have it. But giving that to your character, to your really controlling character, it makes it so that, like, it might seem conceptually fun to play a character who has no idea what boundaries are and constantly crosses them. But it's much better to play a character who subconsciously understands what boundaries are and will back off at the appropriate times so that we can keep exploring that story space and telling that story. So like putting in a limiter of some kind like that is pretty vital.
I'm afraid to even go here because I'm worried it will become me trying to explain improv to James D'Amato, which is not at all any kind of position I ever want to be in.
Improv explain me.
Oh my God! But it was from a book called what is it called? Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and it's about sort of our gut reactions and our gut assessments of things and how the sort of brain's quick processing side of things. And it talked about what sort of a side to the power of yes and that I hadn't realized before, that I'm sure you have, but it really helped me. And it was the idea that like if I go in, if I know where some of these delimiters are, where this person is going to be antagonistic but not to these people, that line is so helpful to riff off of, right? It's something to toe up to and play with expectations around. So knowing that an improv partner is going to yes and me, that gives me a sort of constraint that I can now play with and make really good like comedy or storytelling emerge from. So like those lines in the sand are really freeing, I think, and let people feel like they know how far to play. And so I think when you don't have some of those lines, I'm not sure how far the loner thief is going to take it, and that makes me more hesitant to play with that side of that character because I don't know where it's going to go, or I don't know how to make the best story come of it because I don't know some of its parameters to play with, right? I hope that made any sense.
No, that does make sense. Like establishing a explicit hard boundary that you as the player understand, but maybe the character doesn't.
Right, totally.
You are playing a character who doesn't understand what boundaries are because the player understands what boundaries are and will not cross them because you know what the rules of the game are. Like, again, if somebody handed you a blank piece of paper and said, role play, you might be able to do it, but it's a lot easier if that piece of paper is a filled out character sheet with like the information that you need to do it. So it's all about establishing sort of building blocks that you can work with. And that's kind of what this limiter checklist is.
Yeah.
Other things that might work for a controlling character, I run my mouth, but I am deeply empathetic and it destroys me to hurt people. That means that like none of the things that you do as a controlling person are actually going to emotionally affect people. So your controlling thing could be, before combat, I really want to polish the paladin's shield and make sure it looks really nice because aesthetics are very important to my character who like sort of mother hens everyone around them. That is a one-line thing that you say to get at your character's personality, but it doesn't stop and derail the game.
Yep.
It's very quick and very easy to deal with.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so those are sort of like that. So I will say with that there's also the idea that your character thinks of themselves seriously, but you don't think of your character seriously. If you're making explicit like, hey, this controlling nature of this character, this annoying bits of the character, it's funny to me how not great this is, or like how pathetic this is, or weird this is. That's what I'm having fun with, because that will help the table facilitate that fun.
Yeah.
Like, Synox would constantly do things that wouldn't look good on camera or were by the book and kind of boring, and that would set Blue off, and he would have to like go in and correct things. And like the game, Jim and I both knew that the game is Synox gets annoyed by Blue's behavior, which causes Blue to have to annoy him more, because that was fun for us both. And having that metatextual understanding allowed the character to be annoying without making the player annoying.
Are you playing it for laughs or not? And that's an important distinction.
Yeah, so like if your character choice is I need to control other people because I, the player, want to control other people's characters, you really got to reassess what you think the role-playing game is about, because that is you inflicting your ideas on somebody else, which is not how the game works. I think it's time for another question.
Yes,
thank you very much to, oh boy, this is a long name. I guess at Eggnog on Twitter. Thank you for that question. This one is a challenging one of the most challenging questions that comes up. This may be, instead of a final answer, this may be an evolving thing, but I suspect your best game ever might have answers for this. I am really trying to think of a good one, but all I can come up with is my everlasting problem. How can you achieve a better narration at the table when part of the group does not care about narration, but more about fun and stats and killing stuff? Hey folks, we've had that question is all over GM Advice forums. I think for me, it fundamentally breaks down to there are different kinds of fun that are present at the table. People have a different idea of what they want out of an RPG experience. So the question should not be, how do I make these people play the way I want them to play? Or even the way I have fun playing is, how do we compromise this game to be fun for everyone who happens to be here? So when you look at it that way, it is, okay, what areas are we really going to be focusing on narration, and what areas are we focusing on stats? I was a little bit unnerved by the idea that narration was not included in the category of fun, because I do think it is very fun. But I know from my experience that not everybody sees things that way. And like when I'm running a game at a convention and I'm not at a table with a bunch of like actors and improvisers, I know that my narration might be little bits of seasoning instead of the main course. So usually like after an attack happens or after a roll happens, I'll spend like a second trying to underscore that with narration, because I know everybody else at the table really wants to get to their turn and their tactical move. So that is like how I approach it, is like, okay, if there are different types of like interest at the table, our goal is to compromise to create an experience that works for everybody and everybody can buy into.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So there's a whole chapter on solving game group problems, because again, these are the kind of questions that like really, you know, that these are the kind of issues that kept me from being able to game for years, because I couldn't find a game group that like I could work with or was not real bad to me personally. Many reasons, right? And I didn't have the language or the skills or the experience to say, hey, this is why this isn't working for me. Like, could you compromise with me? I had to wait till grad school when I had lots of people to interact with and learn a lot, right? So there's a whole chapter on kinds of game group problems and like kind of the specific, so things like rules lawyers, right? Rules ignorers, arguments that are happening, things like disruptive choices, like we were talking about, unprepared, poor reactions, boredom, distractions, indecision, a whole bunch of stuff. Also not as really problems, but like ways to deal with a really common different player type, which is like people who are really introverted versus extroversion, and what you might want to do to accommodate that and make it work at your table. So playing other, you know, the player quarterback, right? So there's all kinds of advice for all of that. But, you know, I want to set up too that like there's some advice I have about the specific problem, and then there's also like, not every game group is going to work out, and it really breaks my heart that is true for every given condition or every goal that I have for a given type of game. Like I have people who I absolutely adore, but like I knew that they would be a bad fit for this particular game, and it, you know, breaks your heart because like that's my social time, right? So like I'm really constantly trying to wrangle people into games that maybe aren't the best fit for them, and I'm trying to get into games that maybe aren't the best fit for me. And so there also is some advice on here about how to bring up the idea of like sort of fit in groups, and how to actually have those really hard conversations about, you know, hey, I don't think I'm a good fit for this, or I think you're not a good fit for this particular experience, right? So there's some of that language in here, which I really appreciate. But in specific, like I think for this specific case, like I think asking why, like why aren't they, you know, I think that the why is really important here. Like, why are some of the people not as interested in getting into narration and speaking in character? And if it's because they tried it and they don't like it and it's unfun for them, I don't think you can really change that. If they know that about themselves, great. Now they can speak it, and you can know that and accommodate. And so maybe that's, you know, you're not narrating with that person. Maybe sort of getting more into character is something you do with someone else who's interested in that. So like the why matters. And if they aren't necessarily opposed, but they're still not doing it, a category I have been in for a long time, it might be because they're uncomfortable with that kind of acting, right? That kind of, you know, it can be really stressful, I think, to speak in character. You know, it's much easier, certainly, to talk about what my character is doing than to say it in character, I think, at least for my experience. But it's like, it's really cool when I can make it work and when I have tried it. But there's a whole bunch of things you can do to sort of try that. And maybe one of it is like, you know, I found a lot of success with some like kind of LARP warm-ups or improv technique warm-ups. Just getting, it's all silly. Everything we're doing here is silly. I hate to break it to you. Even the serious stuff is silly. Okay, don't tell anyone, because they won't come and play our games.
I just had like some really long ass complicated thoughts about playing pretend.
Yeah.
We're sitting at a table and we're saying that we're wizards. We're not wizards. So it is very silly.
And so what helps, like, I think sort of shedding the, like, I think it's helpful to like get the silliness out of your system a little bit. And so like, I think warm-ups really help. Like, I'm sure you can recommend a couple. One that I really liked that got me into character for a LARP was like, hey, everybody, just to like start out, we know who your characters are. Walk up and down this hallway like your character. I give you no more instruction than that. Just like, walk down and back as though you were your character in sort of an exaggerated fashion, right? And it's silly walking. And so it gets you sort of, it relieves the pressure valve of like, oh, can I be silly? Can I risk saying something that might be wrong, right? It starts to get you, I think, warmed up.
It sort of breaks that sort of like hard shell that we have between our non-playing life, where we all have to project the image of a person who is like completely put together and competent and confident, and into a space where we can indulge the things that make us happy and be a little bit carefree and childlike. Sometimes like there is a hard, rigid line, and the person that you are during your day job can't be the person that you are at the gaming table. And warm-ups can be a great help, like putting your brain in that space or ritualistically preparing you for what you're about to do. I think if you're looking for resources for that, Karen 12's Improv for Gamers, that is your shit right there, because it is a book full of different improv exercises that will help you with different aspects. And a lot of those are warm-up games.
Yeah. I wonder even if, I think there's a lot of ways to approach this depending on the kind of players that are in the specific table, and again, what the why is for them. If they're a little open to it, I wonder if like, do you, just like you have a bunch of exercises in here, right? Like all of the skills that are involved in playing RPGs are skills you have to practice at and fail at and you get better at, right? Mm-hmm. And so could you, if it's something that they are willing to experiment a little bit with, is it, hey, why don't, we're in a new session, could you ask that like we have everybody go around and says in character like one thing that they talk about at the campfire, right? Or like tell a story from your past in character for a sentence, right? Could it be writing it down just to sort of take that pressure off even less? Could someone write a thing in character? So I think there are a lot of ways to sort of ease yourself into spouting full, beautiful, poetic dialogue at the table.
Yes.
But I get that frustration too. It's hard when you really want to practice it and try it and you don't have a partner to riff off of.
Yeah, and some of that can be mechanical support too. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of this we're thinking in terms of traditional systems, trad systems, like Dungeons and Dragons, or to a somewhat lesser extent like the Cypher system, game systems where the thing that you're doing is like interacting with stuff on your character sheets, and there's not a lot of narrative support. But there are plenty of games with narrative support around them. If you play a different game system like Star-Crossed or
Puppet Land,
Powered by the Apocalypse, like things like that, they have actual narrative support to like, okay, this is the type of narration that we're looking for. They channel your creativity into different pockets to make that process a little bit easier. So yeah, I feel like that's sort of the answer to that question is, hey, you got to figure out what people want, because it might not be the same thing. If it's not the same thing, you got to see if it's worth it to compromise or maybe move in a different direction.
Yep.
If everybody does want the same thing and we're not sure where to start, that is where you as a player, or perhaps even the game system, can provide support to make that process easier for everyone.
I really love this suggestion from Burst of Hope. A suggestion for sort of an easy table warm-up, everyone answers the same question in character. What's the last thing you drank? How do you feel about teeth? Is water wet? Pretty, like, I think that's even better than tell me a story from your past. That's, silly, which breaks the ice and really constrained, so you can just practice in this nice little walled garden of speaking something in character that's very brief.
Yeah. There is an exercise that I have in the Ultimate Character Backstory Guide called Campfire that is a literal mini game that you can use to play out a campfire discussion between characters. And there's going to be an exercise in the upcoming Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide that is about having two characters trapped together 40 minutes after a disaster. It has already reached the point where they know help is coming, so they're not scared for their lives, but they do have to be in a confined space for an amount of time, so it provides a context for them to talk, and it sort of has mechanical ways that guide you through that discussion. It's a great way to walk yourself through dialogue because it prompts like, this is the kind of thing that you want to start saying. And it will also give you juicy little tidbits.
I love that. Something I'm always searching for is I love those campfire moments, but I also like, I think a similar category is, Star Trek. 2 characters walk onto the holodeck and they're playing like pool together, or they're playing cards and they're just talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always like, I feel like that's my current white whale. I'm like, how do I get that? How do I set that up? How do I facilitate that as a player or a GM? How do I make space for that? And I think like really, really well-bounded context and like, a situation that lets that emerge would be really cool. So I'm going to read the heck out of that. I cannot wait.
Yeah. So like there's a lot. I think or Son of a Hurricane on the chat had a very good summation of this question, which is, how do I force people to do the thing that I want to do? And the answer to that question I think we're going to give you is join a BDSM community and have them consent to it.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're playing a game. So I feel like we're in a good place with that question. And that question, again, has been answered so many different places by so many different people. There's no one right answer. And like the unfortunate thing is it's a social situation and you're going to have to navigate it. Thankfully, this book appears to have specific bespoke advice for different situations that you might find yourself in.
And I often find it, a lot of it's just like the opening line, right? And so if it's like talking to a player about a bad fit, right? It's like, there's sort of an example sentence about how you would start that conversation, like the literal first sentence. And it's about, stuff that, I feel like I've picked up from kind of listening to podcasts and talking to therapists, right? Like keeping the focus on the behavior, right? It's not that you are a bad and I want you out of my game. Obviously not that.
I cast you out! Ouch!
But it's about, hey, this, it seems like you want this, and it seems like the game that, we're currently playing in is having this. Can you compromise on that? And if not, I think that maybe we should play a different game together some other time, right?
Okay, so it looks like the next question was actually a very similar thing. I've got people that are shy to role play. Are there exercises and things that we can suggest to warm up or make that process easier? Again, I think that might be perhaps stepping outside of your game comfort zone into games that have mechanics specifically designed to facilitate narrative play. So I feel like we even already answered that.
Yeah, I think, and Improv for Gamers, go to it.
Yeah, Karen 12 wrote a great book there.
It's beautiful.
It is a gorgeous product
God.
too.
I should have brought it. I almost brought it.
So we will move on to the next question, and that is, how would you recommend someone approach learning Invisible Sun as a DM? There's so many books, and while it's terribly exciting, it's also a magnitude of information. Yeah, Darcival, I would really love to run Invisible Sun at some point, but I know I'm not going to read those fucking books. There's too many of them. I'm not going to read all of them.
I didn't read them. That's my solution. No,
that's the secret.
I didn't have the books when I first started playing. Like the PDFs were finally laid out, and I kind of got to read those. But I'm a really to absorb a new system. I learn best when I can like touch a book and like make notes. I don't absorb information as well through PDF. So what I did was luckily there's and I think this is hopefully advice that is generalizable. I think across systems.
I think we'll figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Invisible Sun, there's a whole hour-long video that Monty goes into sort of the core mechanic of how to play Invisible Sun, right? Core mechanic introduces you to the different kinds of characters, the different kinds of magic. Basically, like section 1 of the ultimate, gameplay guide, right? Setting this foundation of what do we actually, what's the minimum viable rules that words that you should know so that you can effectively play this game, right? And then there's because it is a complicated, beautiful beast of a giant black cube. A lot of the reason that it's was so built to be a physical product is because there's tons of cool handouts and stuff to make it a little easier, right? So there's tokens about whether you're enhanced or diminished. There's the Path of Suns board is keeping track of different things for you. There's a I always had out the little rules reference sheet. I almost never used it because what I like about Invisible Sun, like most MCG games, pretty much every MCG game, is that the core mechanic boils down to one core mechanic, right? Like, I want to do a thing, it's going to come down to a roll, right? Like, unless, you're always pointing toward the same core mechanic. There are ancillary systems, right? Like, there's like different kinds of magic you could engage in. There's crafting cool objects. There is summoning demons and stuff. So I think that plays into a major tenet of like your best game ever. Again, and I think sort of where your thinking is at too, which is that like, I feel like there's this expectation sometimes that like a GM hosts the game, wrangles the players, possibly feeds you all, or like, deals with dishes when you all leave. They learn all the rules, they buy all the books, they have all the pencils and all this stuff for you, and they're world building, and they're doing this, and their mastery of the rules. And I think a lot of that can really be broken down, and is already broken down in a lot of like indie games built in. So this book suggests that like you should, in a lot of ways, you should consider like what actually needs to be in front of the player and not the GM.
Yeah.
And so for those different magic systems, I wasn't looking at what abilities you had. You had cards that told you your abilities. That was for, your tiny little rules section. That's your domain, and I trusted you to do it, right? And so that's how it made it really, like, I had the players functionally teaching me how their magic worked in the beginning, and that worked great, I think. You can argue with me on that. But.
No. I 100% agree. I actually think for what Darcy's talking about, there's no better example, and I'm so glad Mike and Eleni sent people here, because I think about it in terms of Shadowrun.
Yeah, great
the
point.
mechanical beast monster where everybody's character likely plays with different stuff, and characters are so specific and bespoke that it would be insane to expect that the GM could comprehend exactly how everyone's stuff is going down. You have to figure out, as a GM, what do I feel like I need to unload from my work?
Yeah.
What can be delegated to players? I think, like, if you're a shaman in Shadowrun, you have to know how summoning spirits work. The GM, all they have to know is how many successes you have, and like what is difficult and what is easy. Because, I've never run a shaman in Shadowrun before, literally don't know a damn thing about it. I've never run a hacker in Shadowrun before. I don't know garbage about the Matrix, but I do know what is good in terms of successes and failures in Shadowrun, and I do know how the general core system works. So if my player knows the general steps that they need to go through, then we can operate together because we're sort of speaking the same language. So if a system is like sort of wildly and like super mechanically complex, like my Shadowrun book that I have at home is like 400 goddamn pages, and like even if I read all of them, the chance of me memorizing all of them is very, very minimal. So people, like, you need to establish an atmosphere where you can trust that certain people are just in their areas of expertise, and allow them to have domain over that so that you can focus on the things that matter about running the game. And I think Darcy...
The things that matter to you specifically. Right?
Yes.
We've kind of all talked about how different GMs operate differently, and they are passionate about different things. If I'm not passionate about the rules, but a player is, right? There's a bit about here about empowering like rules lawyers, or even setting lawyers. Like if you're playing in, Star Wars, or I ran a lot of Planescape games, and like I wasn't around when Planescape was like really a thing, right? I came to it so late, and so sometimes at cons I'd have these real Planescape like buffs in my game, right? And like I know that I don't know every aspect of the setting like these passionate people did,
right?
But I always like use them as a resource, right? Like the people who are lots of times they'll already have people who are passionate to be a resource for a bit of world building that they've done for their character. I am terrible at picking names, so I'm always turning to my players to say, what's the name of this person? Like I am absolutely offloading that. So a lot of like duties of GM, I offload. Yeah.
So you really, I think one thing that I would suggest is, especially if you're approaching a system that is so mechanically rich and full of depth, like Invisible Sun, is to sit down with yourself and ask yourself, what aspects of this stress me out?
Yeah,
And
totally.
do I really need to understand those in order to run the game? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is no, you don't. In order to have an experience, because like the only people I think who run Invisible Sun the way Invisible Sun is supposed to be run are Monty Cook and the team of designers that worked on that game. And I'll bet some of those designers only fully accurately run the tiny bit of the system that they made. What you will do with every RPG is you will run your version of it. Especially if it is, 400, 500 pages spread across a bunch of different books. So, all you have to do is figure out what can I make into my experience of this game. And Darcy, I think, had really perfect advice. Learn that core mechanic. If you understand that core mechanic, that's the answer to everything. There might be a different subsystem that can go into more detail, but you don't actually need that. And you're still playing Invisible Sun even if you don't engage with that subsystem.
And I will say, so there are 4 books, right? Just to give the specific advice, In the Gate, that's sort of the GM book, and it's a big, it's about the same size as the other books, but most of that is the Sooth deck, sort of divination selection. And so the small section at the beginning is so you want to be a game master, and it walks you through it really gently with sort of, hey, here's the headspace to be in. I learned to GM from Numenera's GMing section. I swear by it. It's amazing. And so with Invisible Sun, I would definitely recommend starting there too. And it's going to be similar advice to what we're giving, right? Learn the core mechanic. Let your players have the domains of the world building and the mechanics that they want to have.
Yeah, and you might find that part of your GMing experience does eventually need to be well, my Goetic really, really cares about the whole process of summoning demons, and it turns out that is an important area of focus. But your, maker, but your maker and your Vance, they don't really care too much about the in-depth mechanical processes of their characters, so there's no point in you reading the Vance section and the maker section, because they're just not part of the experience that you need. But you will need to learn the Goetic section, and you can't really know that until your feet are on the ground and you're actually playing the game. So you don't need to know everything before you start playing. You just need to know enough to get things moving. I know in our game of Invisible Sun, I think we discovered very quickly with the Goetic that Kat was a lot happier resolving those negotiations through dialogue than she was through rolling.
Right.
And I'm sure there are certain situations where she would have been well, I know my character knows how to negotiate this, but I really don't want to go through the 5 minutes of dialogue that it would take to arrive at this conclusion, and I'll just roll right now as a shortcut. Your table will establish that on their own. You will be there, you will be part of that process, but you won't figure it out until you're actually playing the dang thing.
Yep, it's very true.
Yeah, I did a really great cat impression there. So that is that question. I think those are all the questions that we received on Twitter. So with that, if the chat has any questions, I'll throw to them, but I'll see, and while we're doing that, I'll see if we got anything on Facebook. No Facebook stuff, so if you have any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, help.
Yes.
I find world building very stressful.
Interesting.
I like riffing off of what people give me, and so when I'm asked to go in a room and world build, and I know that collaborative world building is totally a valid subsection of world building, but when I'm on my own, and sometimes I can't always co-GM, I really get sort of stuck. So when you were creating Skyjacks, right? Can you talk to me about what your process was from generating a world sort of from the beginning? Could you talk about how to get to kind of a decent nugget of okay, this is kind of the world that I think I'm gonna play in, right? I don't know how to get there.
Fascinating.
That's one thing I struggle with.
I like this, so I can sort of walk people through the steps for that. The first, it starts with the initial inspiration, which is sort of the goal that we were trying to get to. And that was Johnny and JPC coming to me, telling me that they wanted to do a program that was about sky pirates. Literally,
cool.
that was the information that they were like, hey, and they were thinking of this as a new show. This was back when Kat was like first leaving the network. We didn't know what the future of campaign was going to be. And like when Kat, before she even left the network, had talked to us about like, hey, maybe we'll wind down Star Wars campaign and sort of resolve this story. Johnny and JPC had like a very reasonable kind of actor-performer responses. Oh shit, we got to figure out what to do so we still have jobs at the end of the day. So they like, I assume locked themselves in a room with a bunch of alcohol and cigarettes, sort of like old time ad executives, and they rolled up their sleeves and shouted at each other until they came up with Sky Pirates. We're gonna be Sky Pirates.
Oh my gosh.
They didn't know who was going to be the GM of this program.
Oh my gosh.
They didn't know what system they were going to use. They knew that they liked the idea of Sky Pirates. So
Wow, okay.
I had that little nugget to work with, and so I was like, okay, what do I actually find interesting about pirates and Sky Pirates? So, like, a lot of that like led me to the first assumptions that I have when somebody says Sky Pirates, or had when somebody says Sky Pirates, or steampunk, which is not a genre that I gel with very much, mainly because I think the way that the genre is presented a lot of the time is characters in upper class Victorian outfits covered in gears. And it really, really cares about specific aspects of the science. So like, you know, Deadlands has its weird ghost coal or whatever that like allows that stuff for, you know, there are people that figure out like, okay, we've made steam be the answer to all of our mechanical problems and we'll start building from there. And like, I didn't care about that so much. And I was like, well, okay, if I'm gonna have fun with the Sky Pirates thing, I don't necessarily want it to fall into steampunk. So instead of looking at the sky portion, I figure like that's something that I can resolve later. Let's look at pirates and what do I care about pirates? And so I am a huge fan of the Decemberists. And they do a lot of nautically themed music. I will not call them a pirate band or a band that sings about pirates. They do have sailors and like shanty, like they take influence from folk, which is built around shanties, and like they sing about sailors quite frequently. So I was like, okay, if this is something that I find compelling, let's listen to this music and think through that. So the things that I got from the music was folk tales. And so like folk tales are something that I find really, really compelling and I love a lot. Like The Crane Wife is a fantastic album and a fantastic series of songs. And even more than that, I truly, truly love, oh my gosh, why can't I think of the album's name right now? It's my favorite album. The album where we talk about changelings and the Forest Queen and all of that. Hazards of Love, thank God. So like I
like the aesthetics of folk tales or something or or stories.
So pirates led me to folk tales. Like it led me to the Decemberists, which led me to folk tales. And I'm like, okay, folk tales and piracy seem to actually go hand in hand. And one of the things that I really like about the Decemberists is them looking to folk tales for inspiration. So instead of steampunk, what I'm going to do is substitute out the science and all of that is normally important in flying ship fiction, and I'm going to put folk tales in there instead. And I'm going to make a folktale punk setting. So folktale punk is all of the thing that keeps our ships in the air is folktales. That's like the core of it. The core of it is some ineffable magic that works because people think it should work. So like, because it sounds like it should work. So when I had that structure, I knew enough, like, okay, I like the Decemberists, I like folktales, I like the folktales that the Decemberists are doing that. So that's how I put my ships in the air. Then that led me down the direction, okay, punk is the term that I put in there. I've replaced steam with folktale. Punk means something. And I was like, well, what annoys me about steampunk is that I don't feel like they're using punk the right way. And that's what I find annoying is like, I think being in upper crust Victorian dress sort of undermines what is actually punk. Exactly. Cyberpunk fucking rules. And I adore cyberpunk because it is almost always transgressive and is almost always about oppressed lower classes pushing back. And folks, what is more tied to that than piracy?
Cool.
So like, you have people who have seized control of ships. There are predatory governments or larger structures that don't want to allow them to succeed. That is punk. So pirates and punk really seem to go along with each other. And my folk stories are the aesthetics that allow all of these elements to be in place. So I was like, okay, I have something that excites me about this. That's when I took it to my group. And we decided on Liz and Tyler to join Johnny and JPC to be part of this group. And we all sat down and we had a session 0 discussion about, okay,
The world.
not even about the world.
Ooh, interesting.
It was,
Themes?
what do you like about this? Here are the ideas that I have. Like the facts are, we know we're going to be doing Sky Pirates. And I like the influence of the Decemberists on that. So what are things that move you? What speaks to you? Liz
Really cool. That's
took
a great way to set that up. Wow. That's really awesome.
that's part of like in the gameplay guide, like that's sort of what session 0 is about. I sort of based my idea of what session 0 should be around kind of what we did for Skyjacks because I know it worked for me.
Yeah.
So we had these discussions and Liz looked through the books and decided she wanted to be an angel. And I think she decided that based on an alien character class that was in the Fantasy Flight book, the Genesis system. It was like, oh, the whole point of this is that we're just a superior version of humans. I like that, but we're doing magic stuff, so can I be an angel?
What do I like about that? I like that it's superior to humans. Yeah, that's great.
And there is a little bit of angel stuff that plays into December stuff, but they don't focus on that. So Liz is like, yeah, I want to be an angel. And I'm like, great. Now angels are important to our story. How angels work are important to our story. And I'm going to need to look into folk tales about angels and how that works in order to make this universe work. JPC knew that he wanted to be a necromancer from jump. Not a goddamn thing in the Decemberist universe has anything to do with necromancy. But there are themes of undead and pirate stuff, and people die all the time in Decemberist songs.
Most of the time.
and people in folktales too, and folk songs as well. So like there were a lot of threads that could tie a necromancer into that. And I was like, okay, necromancy is normally an evil thing. But I don't like it being evil because we're having a protagonist be this thing. So let's keep the creepy part of necromancy, but like, let's see how we can make it nice and good and something that is transgressive against societal norms. So it's like most of society does not view necromancy positively, but Dref is using necromancy to help people. Like as part of medical treatment, when somebody would normally amputate an arm, Dref will raise that arm and that will improve that person's quality of life. Even if it's a creepy and weird thing to do, it's like nice and good at the end of the day. So I walked away from that conversation with what my players were interested in, what they knew they liked about all of this different stuff. And it also started from a place of people exchanging ideas and building off of each other's ideas. So I had this big unwieldy pile of influences. I had the player desires.
All in your head?
Do
you write stuff down?
I recorded the session.
Right.
And Genesis included a sort of setting character sheet. And Genesis also has some pointed questions that they asked, like about like, who are your rivals? Who are major factions in the setting? And like, that is some things that we established. So we figured out in that session, the Red Feather Syndicate and the Mariner. The Mariner's instructions that I was given was, we want this to be a creepy pirate captain. And since I was dealing with like everybody being in the sky and like, well, we're not really dealing with water pirates. If we're not dealing with water pirates anymore, let's just say the sea is dangerous, and it's dangerous in part because of this creepy pirate captain. I then, like, stepping away from them, I was like, okay, now I've got to flesh this out. We need a pirate captain. We need them to be dangerous. What other influences am I working with? At this point, I realized Decemberist songs and the stories in those songs are really cool, but you would not play a role-playing game based on that. Like, you might play one, but it would be hugely specific, and you wouldn't use the Genesis system for it.
One shot, probably.
Exactly. It would be like one of those story games about tragedy and like things falling apart. Like you might do
Quiet Year, maybe.
Yeah, you could definitely do a Quiet Year. You could do a Questlandia. You could do something like that. But I was like, okay. So the other thing that is involved with pirate fiction is adventure fiction. Like I'm thinking like classic stuff, like Treasure Island. And like even historical stuff. Like if you read about the voyages of Sir Francis Drake, they are fucking wild. And there's a lot of swashbuckling and like stealing Spanish treasure and like really exciting stuff. So I was like, okay, what is adventure fiction and what is pulp?
What does it look like here?
Because I know that shit works in role-playing games. I love playing noirs. I love playing pulp fiction. Like when I play Call of Cthulhu or Trail of Cthulhu, I'm doing it with pulp influences. So it's like, okay, let's look at classic adventure fiction. And I came to the black spot, the mark of death in Treasure Island. And I was like, okay, let's make that shit a part of the setting. So it was like, the Mariner is this creepy pirate, and he can control people through curses. And I'm like, I'm pulling in pulps and sci-fi stuff. So let's bring in a little bit of Lovecraft influence and like people slowly lose their minds and there's this call of the sea. And because I have this group of pirates, like it sort of explains why people eventually went into the sky is if the sea is a creepy, corrupting force, then you don't want to be there. But like we're looking at piracy, you've got to do something, right? Like if the sea is dangerous, I don't think it's stopping any colonial empire from continuing to do their business. They're just going to use poor people to sail on the sea because they're bad. And we did want to be anti-colonial as like part of our thing. That was like part of our theme. So we're like, okay, yeah, they were throwing people at the sea, and it got to the point where if you're just continually adding more mariners who come back from the sea changed and unhinged in some way, that eventually is going to make it back and start society to collapse a little bit. Because I also, in Skyjacks, part of the setting stuff is I wanted to weaken colonialism as an overt structure to the point where it could be defeated. Because if we were telling an anti-colonial story, I want my players to actually, hey, we're going to be able to win. At the end of the day, there is a path. Even if the Red Feather Syndicate is like this big, evil, terrible thing, I want the players to feel like there will be a point that we can get to that we actually take this thing out. Because
that seems like a really far-reaching goal that you had. I feel like that has to influence so much about the world that you're building and the NPCs and what you're throwing at them. So that's a really neat goal that you emerged.
And that's a thing, like that is part of like the overt structure that I had with the players and the conversation that I had with the players. Because like I need something to decide and be like, are we the sort of people that win? And like I thought of my audience in this too. I have a huge contingent of my audience that is like marginalized and queer and like they want to see themselves in the universe and they see a lot of oppression in their everyday lives. They want in fiction the opportunity to fight back against that or
feels like hope punk.
Yeah, exactly.
Time, right?
So like getting that was like, okay, I don't want to ignore these oppressive structures and say they don't exist, but I do want to put them in a place where we can reasonably say as fiction creators, oh, this can be defeated and we can deal with this. So like, I guess the overall structure is before I got to the point where I could sit down and do my, independent world building where I was fleshing out these ideas is I needed to have enough inspiration and have enough discussions with the group that I was going to be collaborating with to get to the point where, okay, I know the skeleton that this is, I just got to throw some meat on those bones so that it exists. So if the thing that you struggled with in world building is, I don't know where to start, it's you're not starting from scratch, because that's an insane person's way. And RPGs are collaborative, and we can take advantage of that because it makes things easier if you're playing off other people.
Yeah, there's a whole section in Your Best Game Ever about world building as a group, like some advice if you've never done it before. But man, there's so many opportunities to learn cool ways to do that in lots of indie games, in any kind of improv where you're yes-anding people, right? Microscope is a great tool that it's a game by itself, but I also just adore it as a tool for building a world and a backstory for when I don't want to just be when I want to like totally make a collaborative world with my fellow players. I will use Microscope, and you sort of set out a history of a thing, and you have you lay out concepts that you want to have in your game, and you have concepts that you don't want in your game. So yes, space battles, no aliens, right? That starts to really narrow the kind of story we're telling, right? And it also provides, like, it's another way to get at that, what do my players around me find fun? And how can I make sure that any world building I'm doing is pointed toward the fun that we can all have?
Yeah. And
not against it.
Even if it's just for your group, like, you will find very quickly that other people will gravitate to that and find it appealing. Like, especially if you're doing something for, like, actual play or setting development for a product. Like, we can probably imagine how wildly specific the world of Invisible Sun is to Monty Cook and the folks that dreamed it up. But, like, obviously, there are aspects of it that appeal to a wide audience of people.
And very different aspects, which is great.
So, it's one of those things where you defining those goals. Like, I think world building, even personal world building, is sitting down and getting goals for yourself and determining what your aesthetics are and where you're going to be original, where you're going to borrow, and what influences you actually want to explore.
That's awesome. It sounds like you do most of this in your head.
I do a lot of it in my head.
That is not me. I write it all down poorly on paper, and I don't reference it ever again, but it doesn't come out of me if I don't do that, or if I talk to people.
But, like, there are some things that I do need to write down. I will say in the Ire Piora section of Skyjacks, like, I needed to, like, I was inspired by a lot of different things. There's a particular town in Italy that will run a horse race every year. And also in Florence, there's, like, a weird kind of sort of rugby, sort of football, but there are actual fist fights involved in it. Sport that happens once a year where it shuts down the city. And the city is divided into different neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods support their team. So, like, in Florence, like, there are people who are in the red part of the city, and the green part of the city, and the white part of the city, and they get them involved in this huge game, and they beat the shit out of each other in the streets, and there are no laws, and, like, it's fucking buck wild. And I thought that was really compelling. So I needed to write down and put out the structure of, like, okay, there's this neighborhood of the city. This is the symbols that, like, evoke that. This is kind of what they're about. This is how they dress. These are things. And, like, some of this my players have engaged with, and some of this they haven't. It's important to me to establish so that I know that my ideas make sense.
They're consistent.
And if the players are interested in that, they will dig into it on their own terms. And, like, the race that we did on the stream recently, I needed to decide what the rules were for that. Both to do it in the system, like, I needed to create mechanics. There's a character sheet for the different birds and how they work. But I also needed to decide the in-universe rules for the race. How do people win this race? Are we just getting to the finish line? No, because in an RPG that would be extremely boring. There needs to be more than one thing to go at, because otherwise everything comes down to one or two lucky rolls. And why are we racing at all? The race should just be one roll if that's all it's going to be. So I needed to come up with an excuse to make this interesting in the context of an RPG. And for that, need to write that down, because I can't... Folks, I've had to dub over the names of so many characters because I've forgotten their names. You can hear it in the most recent episode. I'm a mess. So I'm really compelled by the fact that you write things down.
Oh my gosh. It's also good to hear that you don't, you usually have such a good memory for things, and I have to write it all down. I forget everyone's names. So it's good to know that Even James D'Amato forgets names.
I don't remember character names super well. I do remember character concepts, but I cannot tell you how many times I have called the character William or Willem when his name was Wendell. So it just, that's how it goes. Have you been trying to build a world? Oh, yeah.
I forgot. This was not a setup. This was honest world building stress. So Your Best Game Ever, the Kickstarter also funded a GM notebook and a player notebook. And notebooks are great. But these are amazing. Oh my goodness. And I forgot until just this second. So first of all, like there's like different tabbed sections. So there's a whole like step you through some world building details, major NPCs for the GM, adventure locales, emergency ideas, people, and you can check off each person as you use them. What I like most about them, though, is that the paper, we can't show you this.
I don't have the close-up cam on right now.
But it is both gridded, but the grid along the horizontal line is darker, so it's also lined. So very excited. So hopefully I'm going to be using the GM notebook at some point to do some like sketching me through some world building. Likewise, the player notebook has a bunch of cool like, sections about your character, weird quirks they have, people they know. So those are super cool. And if you're ordering Your Best Game Ever now, there's a cool bundle going on. So yourbestgameever.com is where you find out about this. And my world building, I just like haven't gotten to run a game in a million years. I'm very sad about it. And so I have been trying to think about whether I want to experiment with storytelling or like short stories, or I've been experimenting with poetry, but it's that getting started. It's that I don't have the context of this game and this stream that are constraining what I need to do to help me form something. So I have less of a goal, and I think that's part of why I'm struggling to start.
That's interesting. Well, maybe that might be something that we could even do, maybe not even as an entertainment product, but just privately as friends, is like figure out like, how do we create the organizational constraints that will allow you to have success within this really overwhelming task. Like, I will tell you one thing, I don't exactly know how magic in Skyjacks works. And
I kind of know how it behaves or some consistencies of it.
Well, I discovered that through play.
Oh, cool.
In the first thing they did, Jonnet has this section where I knew sacrifices and rituals were kind of part of it, because that's something that again and again shows up in folk magic and folk traditions, and I wanted to honor that. But JPC and Tyler sort of came up with, when Jonnet was trying to silence himself so he wouldn't wake up people when he was sneaking onto his ship, his spell didn't go perfectly, and when he was spiking a cannon, which is nailing the little hole where people ignite it, when he was spiking that cannon, he felt that nailing into himself. And that sort of changed a lot of things about how magic works. Magic, and it was still a very folktale thing, is when magic doesn't go right, it punishes you in a weird and ironic way. And I don't know the exact mechanics of how that works. I am talking to my friend Pat about this a lot, because he's got a very good sense for world building and magic systems and systems for things in general. And I just think of things in terms of story and dramatic thing, and I'm like, hey, the fact that magic can punish you for things not going well, that's perfect. That's rich. I
can use that.
I can definitely use that.
How do I build that into a bigger theory of?
How do I make that make sense to people?
Yeah.
If I was going to introduce this to a group of people, if I was going to write a Skyjacks world book, how do I make this make sense to people? And that is something that I need advice from adults to work through. When I was designing the ships in Skyjacks and Featherweave and how Featherweave worked, I talked to Erica Chappell and Ben Zweifel because they helped me so much, because I don't know shit about aerodynamics or airplanes or anything. And I knew it was kind of going to be important to people that skyships worked on some level. And
they looked like they worked. You could believe it.
Yeah, exactly. You had to believe it. And I knew I didn't want propellers, because propellers were going to be too evocative of steampunk. That's going to put too many gears on the ship. I don't want gears. I want pulleys.
In this house, we have police.
And so Ben sort of had to like go through like, hey, you've solved the buoyancy problem that if featherweave gets heated up, it's lighter than air. That gets ships in the air, but it's not going to move, and it's certainly not going to move in a direction that you want it to move. So he like eventually had to decide that also not only does featherweave want to become lighter than air when you heat it up, it also wants to move away from a source of heat and fire, and so that helps a ship propel itself. And so that is something that like I needed somebody who had an organizational scientific brain to tell me like you have to solve this problem. And there are some problems that turns out you don't have to solve. There are just giant birds and skyjacks. And why are they able to fly with riders on their back? Fuck you. That's why. They just do. We had a question is, what is the website for the notebooks again?
So it's all sort of related. Your Best Game Ever. If you go to yourbestgameever.com, it'll bring you to the page where you can get the Your Best Game Ever bundle with the notebooks, with one of each for like a discount. And then once this is on like regular release as opposed to pre-order, so imminently, that bundle will go away and you can order them on their own. And like, these things are really beautiful. I feel like I'm underselling them because they're not exactly the point of the stream, but they're really pretty.
I mean, if I had the close-up cam pulled up, hubris guided me to think that this was just going to be a two-shot and we wouldn't need to.
Joe.
Yeah, we did need Joe. Well, I mean, Joe, if you're out there, we didn't need you. It was good that you went off and had fun, but I'm also lost without you.
Where can people pre-order the Ultimate RPG
backstory guide, or the gameplay guide, rather. Yeah, no, I did it. I fucked it up. It was me. So if you want the Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide, you can just go onto Amazon and search for that title or my name, James D'Amato. That will also pull up the Ultimate Gameplay Guide. If you hate Amazon for righteous reasons, then you can go to bit.ly/ gameplay /RPG gameplay. That will pull up the book page on Simon & Schuster, which is my publisher, and that will have links to lots of different vendors. Because this is distributed by Adams Media, which is a division of Simon & Schuster, you can actually go into any brick and mortar bookstore and say that you want to pre-order it. And that can either be through the Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide or go to James D'Amato, and their system should have a way of pulling it up. Cool. So like, and that is big ones like Barnes & Noble, or little ones like your favorite indie brick and mortar bookstore. You can just go in there that way. Or you can go to Adams Media's website and pull that up as well. Pre-orders are open because the book is coming out on October 3rd. If you are interested in this book, I ask you to please pre-order it, because that really helps out us with like the numbers. If Barnes & Noble sees that a lot of people are ordering this book, and like you can do that through their online site or whatever, they will order more to be in stores, which will overall make it a more successful product for me. And I do need that to be successful so that I can continue to eat and live. So that would be great.
I mean, it also like. If you have the financial means, or if a friend does, recommend they pre-order, because like that also tells the industry, right, that like people who read books would like more. So many people are interested in games. Like, I think both of us dream of a world where like, there are lots more options even than those on this table for these kinds of questions and more that we haven't even thought of. So like, make your mark on the industry. Go support your friendly local bookstore and ask them to order this book, and tell the big publishers that like people want this.
Yeah, I've had talks with my editor multiple times about a lot of this process has been us proving to her editorial board that RPGs are a worthwhile thing that people are interested in.
Yeah.
And like, because the Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide was successful, like there are multiple RPG projects that they're doing over at Adams Media. And so people going out there and pre-ordering books and like giving books reviews and things like that, that shows the mainstream book industry that RPGs are a thing now, and they're a thing that is like good and profitable for them, which will ultimately make our hobby and the people who are professionals within our hobby live better lives. Like it will, I'm hoping that like Simon & Schuster will go out to game designers and start going, hey, we want to sell your game, because that would radically change our industry. So, you know, your enthusiasm and your support is tremendously helpful for that.
The other way you can shape the industry right now is by voting in the Ennies.
Yeah, vote in those Ennies, folks.
And the judges make a big difference in what gets nominated for the Ennies. So even though I don't tend to know those people very well, unfortunately, like they're names that I don't know very well. Each of them has an interview, and so if you have the time to sort of go look at each person who's nominated, it shows like what they care about in games. And if you want the Ennies to reflect what you care about in games, you can help select those judges.
Yeah. So with that, I hope that y'all got some use out of this stream and you had fun. I know Darcy and I had fun.
I had a blast. I got a lot of use out of it. I hope it was helpful for other people.
I feel like there's good follow-up streams that could come out of
Yeah.
this. But thanks everybody so much for sending in questions. Thank you for hanging out with us in the chat. It was so fun hanging out with all of you. And please buy our books.
Yeah.
Buy our books. I'm gonna turn it off now.
Hope everyone has a great night or day or whatever, and hope you have happy gaming and lots of good and even great sessions and characters ahead of you.